Hello all, a nice day here, bringing you a knife review of a Kansept knife. It still sounds weird. What we're looking at today is the Tuff knife designed Odd 21. And it is an odd knife, there is no doubt about that. Gotta get your finger out of the way because the front flipper comes around and hits you. So, this is a knife in 20 CV with a very broad sort of drop point swedged blade, which is actually quite good looking, honestly. And weirdly juxtaposed next to this almost much smaller handle. This knife is in titanium on bearings. You got a flipper, and you have a front flipper. And my word, this thing is jimped everywhere. So, tons of traction, super easy to do. Let's get to specs. As I close the blade. Interesting. Overall, blade length is to right here at the top of this is 3 and about 3 inches almost on the dot. You get kind of 3 1/8 back here to the termination to the edge. Of course, you can't really use this back corner, but it's there. 4 3/8 on the handle, and overall about 7 1/2. Yeah, that about adds up. Comparisons. This is a relatively small knife, honestly. Comparisons to the Civivi Elementum and comparison to the Civivi Conspirator. It sort of falls directly in between them, though I think a lot of that's, well, a little bit of its blade, a little bit of its handle. But it honestly feels much closer to the Elementum in hand. It just has a big, broad blade. And speaking of big, broad blade, I mean, it's tall because of that. It's a chunky thing. It is contoured titanium, but they are relatively thick slabs of it. I mean, this is really actually quite thick slabs of titanium on this knife. Which surprised me when I first got it in hand. I have to be honest, this is one of the thicker titanium knives other than, like... This might be my thickest pure slab of titanium knife that I actually have right now. Now that I think about it. Great action on bearings. Why does this thing never want to zero out on me? Thickness. 30 thousandths. So it's reasonably thick, over 1/2 inch. Certainly not unreasonable, but it's not super thin in the hand, which goes hand in hand with this. Oh, I'm not going to be able to measure that, am I? Wait a second. $170 thousandths, though I think it's a little thicker than that actually in the titanium. Let's see if I can get the measurement up here. 180 thousandths on the titanium, yeah. Now it's zeroing out that way. That thing fights me. Blade stock. Pardon me. 137 thousandths. Maybe they were going for 135, maybe not. Behind the edge, 15, 16 thousandths, maybe 17. I'm going to call that 16 thousandths behind the edge. Which is pretty reasonable, honestly. Especially considering when you look at this thing, it doesn't have a lot of room to drop. It looks like it's going to be a real thick one. And it gets thick relatively quickly, but not nearly as bad as I thought it would be when I first saw it. It's much better geometry than I was expecting. Moving on to hardware with the T8 pivot, T8 body screws. The pocket clip is mounted inside in what appears to be a T6, but you don't actually ever have to interact with that. So two T8 screws is basically what you're dealing with. Oh, bother. Hold on just a moment. And we're back. Okay. It is as I feared. This does not appear to be a captive pivot. So you got both sides. However, I was able to take this pivot completely out from one side. So while this side is not captive and can be unscrewed, it didn't have any issue, or it didn't give me any issue unscrewing it purely from one side. I got that screw completely out. So not a captive pivot, but functionally captive, which is kind of odd. Not that I'm complaining, because I don't like captive pivots. Kansept, I know Kansept occasionally does not use captive pivots. I really wish they would. I really wish they would. It just tends to, unless they have something that they can dial in that they know they're doing right, because, again, this one worked well, that allows them to better adjust the blade or something. I don't know. I prefer not to see captive pivots. This knife also went back to center with no play. Yep, super, super easy. No problem whatsoever. And the action's still great. So, this thing is definitely dialed in with the tolerances pretty well. But, still prefer not to see non-captive pivots. Where was I? That took me completely out of what I was doing. Weight. Weight is the final specification that we have not gotten yet, I believe. Can we see the... Yes, it's zeroed out. 4.9 ounces, 9.7 ounces. So it's 5-ounce knife. Weight is not particularly great on this one for the ratios. It's clearly not what the objective was with this thick titanium. Even with this holes for weight reduction, there's no weight reduction in this side of the scales. And with that thick of titanium, yeah, there was no way of getting around it. It's going to be slightly heavier than other knives of its size. That said, 5 ounces, not a big deal for me, not a big deal probably for most people. Hold on one second. Again, I'm stopped. Alright, I was going to make a weight comparison, but I realized they didn't have one. I think it's approximately the same as a D-cell battery in weight. I noticed that it is about as long as 2 double A's in length. So, if that helped with your comparison, that's about what you got. You got maybe 3/4 that to actually hang on to. And now we're done with the specs. Finally, it's taken a while. I've been distracted. So, getting into this knife. Got a flipper, front flipper, both. It's wider jimping than I normally like, but it works here. It's knocked down just enough. I know sometimes Kansept does a little bit too much on the smoothing jimping. This is not the case. It doesn't really do much in the open position other than give you some sort of, like it has a presence, you know it's there, but it doesn't really do anything. Sort of seats down into the knife. Blade, Kansept's logo, that's fine. I actually like that. Tuff Knives logo, like that too. I don't like seeing the name of the knife, of the Odd 21, or the code of the knife, internal code for Kansept. Kansept loves putting it on their knives. Almost always the name, and pretty much guaranteed to be that code of whatever the knife is. I really wish they'd get rid of that, because otherwise, that's actually pretty good looking. That's not too much. Their logo's not bad at all, and the logo of the maker's fine. They could have moved it up a little bit, but it's fine. Branding's alright. This is a flat ground blade that, like as I said, was thinner than it honestly looks. It looks like a chunky thing. And it cuts better than I was expecting it to. It came pretty darn sharp, and it's lost a little bit of bite out the edge here, but it's not bad. Moving on from the blade into the pivot area, it looks like I did not take this knife apart, but it honestly looks like these might be Teflon ceramic bearings instead of bronze or phosphor bronze caged bearing, or whatever that material is. They look like they might be Teflon in there. I just noticed that. That's just observation. Hello. Just wanted to add one little thing in here when I was talking about the aspects of the blade. I didn't mention that there's no real lock bar cutout. Now that's a bit of a problem, but it is chamfered on both sides and chamfered on the inside. Enough so that I can sort of come from the side and get somewhat of a grip, though it does require me to come a little bit from the front. It's not ideal, but it's clearly designed to keep the flow of things, and it's not bad. Lock bar is quite strong on this thing, too. Just wanted to insert that. That's all. The stop pin is attached to the blade and garaged and moves with it, so there's nothing here, which means you can do whatever you want to this blade edge, which is good because the plunge grind is terrible. The plunge grind is honestly kind of already past hitting the edge of the edge, if that makes sense. We're basically starting a smile already, but feel free to cut in whatever you want because there's nothing there. So as soon as this gets ugly, and the plunge grind honestly looks like it ends like right here. It's kind of hard to tell. So, should it be that way from the factory? Ideally not, but they at least left you some ability to do something about it. We got a frame lock with the lock cut out on the inside, which is very nice touch. I don't always mind the lock cut out on the outside. Some knives make it work, especially when they do it like multiple cutouts instead of just one big one. It can look good. It can actually go with the flow, but there's no doubt about that it seems to function better in and out of the pocket when it's on the inside. Speaking of in and out of the pocket, this pocket clip is interesting. See how it's super thin, but it's pretty strong tension on this thing. It's not bad. It's also wide and flat, and honestly, I think it has to be, because otherwise it would probably feel really weird. You can definitely feel it a little bit, maybe just at least I can feel just a little bit of it here. But because it's wide and flat, it just sort of feels like part of the knife, if that makes sense. It doesn't feel like you've got this big thing sitting in between you and the handle. So that works. I was curious when I saw that, because it doesn't look like it's going to work, but it does. Honestly, the whole thing. Yeah, see right here, that's the only thing that's touching me. It could maybe be a little bit shorter. The pocket clip does work though, so. But the whole thing about this knife is it didn't look like it was going to work. It looked like it was too small, like it was going to, like it's got, I mean, it looks like it's got too much blade, but camera. It comes together to work much better than I thought it was going to. And we'll get to that in just a moment, but backspacer, flame titanium, that's this version, not all of them are flamed. Almost all the versions have these holes, and I do not like knives where there's only a design element on the show side and not on this side. I'm not too fan of the speed holes in general. I would just prefer just the thin milling lines or something like that to emphasize the overall. But if they'd put a couple here, I'd be much happier. But I'm not totally unhappy. For some reason, this one, it's just, I sort of am willing to accept it. Also, the speed holes do actually add a position to grip onto, which is kind of funny that they're semi-functional. This is honestly the weakest part of this knife for me. I just don't love them. That's a personal thing. And just funny enough, just putting a couple of these small ones right here would have probably been a vast improvement. It would have at least carried the design element through the whole thing. That's just me being nitpicky and crazy and liking things the way I like them. Other than that, the ergos are really good. It's contoured. Yeah, you can feel this part of the clip, the upper part of the clip, but it's flat, so it's not bothering you at all. And speaking of ergos, again, when I saw this thing, I thought this is way too small of a handle, because I saw how small the actual blade is and the overall is when I was looking at it. I was thinking, oh, you're not even going to get a comfortable grip on that. And yet, because of this angle back here, it works. It just sort of works. I mean, it's not a lot. It's not a huge handle. I'm basically using every bit of it except this tiny little thing back here. But clearly, Jeff at Tuff Knives was very specific with his design language here and thought this thing through, and that's a dog, and thought this thing through when he was designing it. Because that little pokey out bit right here takes what looks like is going to be just an uncomfortable or too small handle. I don't like 3.5 or 3 finger knives personally, unless they're like little tiny micro 5th pocket knives. But this little bit sticking out here adds just enough to get a good grip and feel comfortable and feel safe with a full grip and use this big old blade. And because of the way it's shaped, it's not actually that hard to get to the tip either. So, props where they are deserved, because this has clearly been thought out. The action is great. The detent on this knife is crazy good. Yet not too bad for the front flipper. Honestly, this whole thing is much better than I thought it was going to be. It is a little bit hard for the reach around because you're kind of on the lock bar. But you can do it. It's a bit thick for this, but can I do this? No. That hurts. I'm pinching the flipper tab in place and just grinding my finger against this. That's okay, so that one doesn't work for me, and I also got myself in the hand. So that one doesn't work, but this one, as long as you know where you're at on the lock bar, does. It's a little finicky and doesn't feel like you have the strongest grip, but it works. Also, polished pivot color, or semi-polished pivot color. Okay, fine. That's nice. It's there. This knife comes in at about... this version, I think, came in at $199. Yeah. There is a version with Kansept's Damascus, which I think is a 10 CR Damascus. That also comes in at $199. The blacked out version of this knife, and I think there's one other version, comes in at $189. They're good prices. They're very reasonable prices, and I'm not angry at them at all, especially considering the quality that this thing actually has shown to have, and the thickness of titanium and what you're getting. I'm very happy with it. The only thing that I would like is maybe no speed holes and an option to get the plain blade in something other than tiger stripe. Because that's not really an option here. The plain handles are either the black version or with Damascus. So I guess I'm more bothered by the variants that are offered than anything else, which is a good thing, because overall, this is a really good knife, and I really like it. And it's done much better than I thought. Lots of nice little touches here. Good in the hand. Good knife. Definitely recommendable, especially at that price point. That is, I think, everything from me. This one's been a bit weird. On and off, stop and start. Dog doing weird things. So if you stuck around, I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Maybe consider liking and subscribe. Leave a comment, something, for the algorithm, all in all. That's all from me, though. Odd 21. Yeah. Alright. See ya.